And we'll have our invocation by Councilmember Joy. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I invite you to reflect with me, to take a moment to consider the importance of our leadership, not only for this meeting, but for our future work. Maya Angelou said, "Do the best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better." Our community is experiencing impact by tragic public safety events. With humility and compassion, I ask we reflect on these problems. For the public safety and the welfare of every person in our community, how do I uplift and support through my leadership? To hear and acknowledge uncomfortable comments about our community problems from everyone who speaks. To hear frustrations, anger, fear, and not accept hate against any person. To consistently move forward with equitable solutions to address our public safety needs. Finally, I thank our community helpers who put themselves at risk for our safety.
Thank you. Denise, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Mayor. Councilmember Shaw. Here. Gulick.
Here.
Neese.
Excused.
Owen.
Here.
Joy.
Present.
Chiriki.
I'm here.
Tidswell. Here. Purinton. Here. Boyette.
Here.
Repsis. Here. And Mayor Cole.
Here. Council, we have two sets of minutes for approval this evening. First, February 27th and then March 13th. Is there a motion or are there any changes or comments? Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that we approve the minutes for February 27, 2023, and the minutes for March 13, 2023, as read.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Tidswell. Any discussion? Seeing none, motion is for approval. Both sets of minutes. If in favor, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Council courtesies. I'm going to start us off. We've got a stranger with us, formerly known as Rob Rogers of the Billings Gazette, has come back to life. He's been promoted, kicked upstairs, and so congratulations, Rob. But you've got a special guest with you, so if you'd like to come to the podium and bring your guest with you, you can tell us who you brought.
Okay. Yeah, I'm off the beat, and so
Is that mic on?
replacing will be
Kevin?
Amy Nile. Let Amy introduce herself.
I'm Amy Nile, and I'll be replacing Rob.
But Amy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm originally from Forsyth and studied journalism at the University of Montana. I've worked for papers, the Everett Herald in Washington, Las Vegas Review Journal, and all kinds of other papers throughout the Pacific Northwest. And so now I've come home and I'll be covering City County Beat.
Very good. Well, welcome home.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Other council courtesies this evening. I'll also just repeat that the crew of the USS Billings sends their regards. This past week, I had the privilege of going to Naval Station Mayport in Jacksonville, Florida, for the change of command ceremony of the USS Billings with friends of the USS Billings President Ron Spence. And it was a great honor, two outgoing captains going out and one of the new silver crew coming in. And it was a great honor, and the ship is doing well, and send their regards. So, any other council courtesies? Councilmember Purinton?
Maybe just an update from either the chief on Officer Urena.
Chief St. John, the question was if you could give us an update on Officer Mike Urena.
Mayor, Council, good evening. Pleased to report that Detective Urena was released from the hospital on Saturday, and he is convalescing at home right now. He is certainly not lacking for attention. There's a lot of friends, family, and officers that are regaling themselves to whatever. So he's doing well, and I appreciate all the support.
Thank you. Councilmember Owen?
While the chief's here, let's just talk in general about what's happened over the last couple weekends. What can you tell us? What can you tell the public?
Well, I think you heard already press conference on the shooting up on Birch Lane, so I won't go over that unless you have specific questions. Yeah, we had the standoff that resulted in the shooting on Saturday. Started with essentially a carjacking or stolen vehicle. We had a round fired in the air. Our officers located that vehicle. The decision was made to allow the pursuit to continue. Made its way through town up into the Heights. The suspect there hit a couple cars, disabled her car or the stolen vehicle, and ended up coming to arrest on 6th Avenue North, just west of Main Street and the bypass. Efforts to negotiate were unsuccessful. The SWAT team and negotiators were called. Half of our SWAT team is on the bench because of the previous incident, so we respond with a combined team with Yellowstone County. The continue to negotiate was not successful. At some point in time, they introduced chemical agents or tear gas into the car, and the suspect came out with a gun. I'm not sure if it was pointed or fired. Regardless, one of the deputies fired, striking her, and she ultimately died. So that was that incident there. We also had a situation on the west end, a prom after party at about 5 a.m. There were some, things taking place. One individual called for a ride home. A parent came to pick that person up. Argument took place, and a juvenile pulled a gun out and shot an adult. Non-threatening injury, and that individual was subsequently brought to us by their parent and then taken into youth services. So that was that one. Then we had a couple robberies and other things, unusual stuff to take place. Suffice to say, it was not a good couple weekends for Billings.
Thank you, Chief. Certainly tragic. Councilmember Owen? Sorry.
What do you think needs to happen now?
In which regard? We're dealing with mental illness. We're dealing with addiction issues. We are dealing with a prevalence of firearms. We're dealing with an inability to constructively deal with conflict. And we have a total disregard for authority and the criminal justice system, or a combination thereof. So I'm hoping that was an anomaly of a weekend, and that people wake up and figure out that this is totally unacceptable and totally unnecessary across the board. So we'll keep working with our efforts. Again, on our side, we investigate, gather the facts, we make arrests, and that is what we did.
Chief, in the case of the officer-involved shooting that resulted in a fatality, there will be an investigation process. Briefly, can you just describe for the public how that process works?
Certainly, Mayor. There are 3 parallel investigations that take place. There is the criminal investigation, which in this particular case is a combination of Yellowstone County and BPD Investigations Division. There is a division of criminal investigations comes and does their independent review of the incident, and then in this particular case, it's a sheriff's office. Their professional standards will be conducting an administrative review, which is parallel to the other 2, and that is to make sure that policies, procedures, training, and make recommendations on any deficiencies on tactics. So those are the 3 things that take place. Ultimately, it will be referred to the county attorney for review, and by state law, a coroner's inquest will be called and a jury seated for yet another review. And then with us, I'm not sure what the sheriff's going to do. Supervisory agents from Division of Criminal Investigations gives the general overview for thoroughness, for accuracy, and for objectivity. So for our process, it's at least 4 levels that we look at an incident.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Anything else for the chief before we let him go? All right, thank you very much.
Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. Any other council courtesies, council? No. Okay. Very good, then we'll move on to proclamations. We do have a proclamation this evening in recognition of Week of the Young Child. Proclamation reads as follows: whereas the first year of a child's life are critical for brain development and future learning, and approximately 12% of the 12,000 children in Yellowstone County under the age of 6 live in low-income families. And whereas quality early childhood programs benefit children, families, and our local economy by ameliorating poverty, remedying delays, preventing child neglect, and helping children prepare for school so they are more likely to succeed in life. Whereas many child care providers continue to support children and families during the pandemic at great personal and professional cost to themselves, and payment rates for services to low-income children generally do not cover the cost of quality care. And whereas our community and its children benefit from quality early childhood education that's developmentally appropriate, accessible, affordable, and reflects the rich diversity of linguistic, racial, and cultural identities, and whereas we support the teachers and providers of early childhood education in our community who deserve a family-sustaining wage that's commensurate with the required education and skills they bring to the complex and valuable work that they do. And whereas Week of the Young Child is an annual week-long national celebration created by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. Now, therefore, I, William Cole, Mayor of the City of Billings, during the 52nd anniversary of the Week of the Young Child, do hereby proclaim April 1 through 7, 2023 as Week of the Young Child in Billings, and recognize the essential work of early childhood educators in our community, and urge all citizens to support efforts that increase children and families' access to high-quality early childhood education. That concludes our proclamations. Council reports. Council, any council reports for groups that you serve on and representation of the rest of the council? Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Councilmember Tidswell and I met with the local committee. We looked through some questions that may be pertinent to our situation of whether or not we need a new, whether or not you need to expand a prison system or Yellowstone County detention. There's a series of questions that are asked that address the needs within the community and how, whether or not you're doing your best kind of practices. Those questions were really helpful, and anybody on council, I'm going to be putting that together, and anyone on council who would like a copy, I would be happy to send that to you. The coming local affairs subcommittee, we're going to be reaching out to the school district. We haven't yet really reached out to them, and we hope to invite the liaison that has been appointed. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Purington, Shrieky, and Rupsis.
Thank you. Thanks, Denise. Yeah, I would like to see that. I would imagine all of council would. Just reporting, since Councilmember Neese is not here, we did have our legislative committee meeting as usual this past week, and we came up with a whole slew of bills, and we kind of shuffled them around to everybody. So we will be looking at those on Wednesday. Some of us are on tap for hearings this week. And so, yeah, we're just moving on.
Thank you. Councilmember Shrieky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. I was part of 2 different meetings today, both having to do with moving forward with public education, one on traffic safety and trying to reduce the number of crashes that happen in the area through education, and the other one rebooting the Family Violence Task Force. Both of those organizations are actually in a position to start doing some stuff pretty soon. I'm probably talking ahead of myself by saying this, but the transportation or the traffic one hopes to have a a safe Saturday in October kind of thing, and bringing all the different organizations together and having like a street fair kind of thing at one of the fire departments. I am getting way ahead of myself by saying that right now, but that's the next project that we're working on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ripsis.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, it's kind of a dual report, tagging on to what Councilmember Purinton was saying about the Legislative Committee, and then also reporting from the DVP Board. That board this week voted to recommend an increase to the TIF grant for the Old Town Flats project. As we all know, the construction costs are way up. And the Old Town Flats project, I see Mr. Griffin in the back here, may not be feasible without some really creative financial mechanisms, and of course part of that is an increased grant award. Happy to speak with any of you about that. I'm sure Mehmet Casey would be, Mr. Griffin would be, anybody else on the DVP board. But I raise that not just to say that that's coming down the pike, and we'll see that here shortly, but as far as the legislature goes, there's a new bill, SB 523, that just came up in the last few days and had its first hearing today, that will significantly curtail the ability of our TIF districts to really almost even exist. It will really put a damper on what we can do economically to help our city develop. So those TIF districts are incredibly important. We just don't have a lot of tools at our fingertips to help with economic development projects. Projects like the Old Town Flats and many others simply wouldn't happen without that level of public support because the financials just don't make sense. This is something that we now have our eye on. If it gains any traction, I'm sure we're going to need a big show of support from the council to help encourage legislatures to go in a different direction, because this is something that's important to our community, and we'll keep a close eye on it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that report. Councilmember Owen.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to let everyone know that the Budget Committee is now shifting into high gear as we're on the eve of budget consideration for fiscal year 24. So we have started and will continue to meet approximately every other week to work through budget issues, help give some input into department presentations, identify significant policy changes or funding changes for council. We've already started to have some of those meetings, and we'll continue to do so as we head into budget presentations for council, which will start in early May. We are also reviewing the execution of council-adopted amendments in the fiscal year 23 budget, as well as proposed amendments from the staff on the fiscal year 23 budget, trying to make sure that things are getting done. I would urge, particularly as we head into our retreat, that we be thinking about how we align our budgetary resources and our public safety goals. We clearly have an issue here in our community, and I don't think it's reasonable for us to expect the police department to carry the full load. I think it's time for some council leadership. It might be time for some council working committees. We might need our own task forces to begin to ensure that we are aligning and prioritizing our resources. And so as you're thinking about that heading into the budget cycle, please talk to the three of us on the budget committee. If you have ideas, I have a few thoughts that I'll share during council initiative time, but I think this is the opportunity to really put our money where our collective mouths need to be, in my opinion, which is providing a broader, more aggressive public safety strategy in support of our police and fire and legal and code enforcement who are out there on the front lines every day. So that is what's going on, Mayor, in the Budget Committee.
Very good. Thank you. Any other council reports? Don't see any, so move on to our city administrator report. Our city administrator, Chris Kukulski, is in Helena, begging and cajoling in an attempt to get some dollars for our West End water treatment plant. But Kevin Iflin, our assistant, is in charge. So Kevin, what do you got for us?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I've just got a couple quick things. And yeah, Chris was set to testify at 3 o'clock today, and I think he finally got on about 5 o'clock. So he might have a late night trying to come back. Just a reminder that we do have the council retreat this Friday, March 31st, from 1 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 p.m. at Rock 31, which is 201 North Broadway, and again on Saturday, April 1st, from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. And these are open to the public and will be available by Zoom as long as I can get it up and running with the advice of our city clerk. So there was no ex parte items sent to the mayor and council after 3 o'clock concerning items on the agenda tonight. So that's all I have, Mayor.
Very good. Thank you. We'll then move on to public comment on non-public hearing items. So for anybody who might be new with us tonight, there is a copy of our agenda back on the cart there. And this is the opportunity for public comment on any of the items under item 1. So that's our consent agenda. The other two items, item 2 and item 3, are public hearings, meaning that we will have an opportunity for comment on those items later when we get to those items. But if you're here and you're interested in one of the items under the consent agenda, item 1A through 1L, this is your opportunity. We ask you to come to the podium, tell us your name, keep your comments to 3 minutes, and tell us also where you live. And that's it. If you're here to comment on something that's not on our agenda at all, you'll have an opportunity to do that at the very end of the meeting. So is there any public comment on item 1? Any public comment on item 1?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Steve Chandra. I live at 1109 North 31st Street. And as a 35-year resident of this community, I'm here to say thank you to the council, to the city staff, as you consider using some of the Transportation Alternatives Program funding to help build the Stagecoach Trail and provide a safe and scenic route from the valley to the rims for those of us that like to walk and hike and ride our bikes and look at birds and that sort of thing. I attended the groundbreaking for the Skyline Trail and the Inner Belt Loop. And I think at one of those, the mayor and maybe some others said that those are pretty big deals for this community. And I agree. I think the Stagecoach Trail will be another big deal. And as this community continues to build out our infrastructure for active transportation, I think Billings will become increasingly known as the place to be for those of us who care about an active lifestyle, both visitors and residents. And I'm going to continue to be active into my 90s if I have anything to say about it. So I think Montana's
Which is a long way,
Trailhead
since
City.
you're only in your 30s, Steve. So
Montana's Trailhead City can also be known as the city that is healthy by design, that we're intentional about this stuff. So I look forward to the day I can safely hike up to the rims and along the Skyline Trail. And as soon as those projects are finished, I'm confident the next big thing will be funding for the Yellow Jacket Trail along North 27th Street from MSU Billings to the top of the rims. Thank you.
thank you. Any other public comment on any items under item 1? Don't see anybody coming forward, so we'll close the public comment period and move on to item 1, our consent agenda. Council, are there any items to be separated? Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to, 1F is what I'd like to reconsider.
1F, Transportation Alternatives Program, grant application, okay? Councilmember Purington? 1E, Jerry Metcalf Foundation grant application. Any other separations? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion or staff questions for the non-separated items? Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to approve the consent agendas items except for items 1E and 1F.
Second by Councilmember Purington. Any discussion? Councilmember Gulick?
Item 1J is the legacy subdivision. I'm not going to vote against this, but I'd just like to point out that the layout of the streets isn't real good for taxpayers in general. Like there's a cul-de-sac that serves just 3 lots in block 3. And actually, it only would serve lot 3 if the other lots were facing 52nd Street West. That's just a lot of asphalt that we need to maintain and street sweep and clear and all that stuff. So I would encourage us to continue to demand of our developers that we look out for the best interest of the public.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like some confirmation on number 2 on the traffic signal at 48th. I just wanted to confirm that that the city would be paying close to $200,000. It's almost a $400,000 project, and I understood that we're splitting that $400,000 with the county, which would put us right around 200. Is that correct?
Debbie, if you can help us, this is item 1A sub 2, work order 2310 Grand Avenue and 48th Street West traffic signal improvements.
It is. We have an agreement with them to split it.
Okay, and that's the split.
Right, 50-50.
Thank you. And I just want to point out items G and H. These were donations by Albertsons in recognition of their opening of their new store at 54th Street to the Billings Police Department and also to the Billings Fire Department. I think that was $5,000 each or $2,500 each. And the two chiefs received their big checks. So we appreciate that from Albertsons very much. Any other discussion? If not, we'll proceed to a vote. The motion is for approval of all of the consent agenda with the exception of items 1E and 1F. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. First separated item is item 1E, Jerry Metcalf Foundation grant application. Councilmember Purington, that was your separation. Would you like to start us off?
Well, I was having trouble with this as I read about it. I went to the Metcalf website, and it looks like people that qualify are organizations and individuals. It doesn't say anything about city government. So I wondered if we even actually are eligible for it. And then, so some of my questions with it, when does that match have to be completed? We have a $50,000 match with the endowments. So when do we have to complete that? My understanding is that $20K is coming from Mobilize the Magic City, $10,000 from Metcalf, and we're still short $20,000. So where is that coming from? So if anyone can speak to that, I would appreciate it.
Looks like Wyeth Friday. And Councilmember Joy?
Thank you.
Who would you like to start? Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The total amount that needs to be raised is $20,000. That's the total amount for the match. $7,000 has already been raised, so it's asking for that additional grant money that would help to make that match. So the timeline, I'm not sure about the timeline, but the total amount of the match is $20,000. Thank you.
So 13,000 remains, and that, if this grant were received, that's what would it go for, that 13,000?
Yes. So 13,000 would remain, the 10,000 would pay that off, and you'd get down to 3,000. That is that total for match. Thank you.
Wyeth, is that, can you nod as that's consistent with your understanding? Okay, he's nodding.
Well,
Councilmember Purington?
the memo says it's a dollar for dollar match. So that means to me that we have to raise $50,000. Isn't that what a dollar for dollar match means?
Wyeth?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. So there's actually in-kind also that's counted toward this. So the time of the group working on the project is also counted. So that's why the 20,000, as Councilmember Joy said, is the cash amount that's the goal, but then there's additional matching with in-kind contributions. And we're actually seeing, to Councilmember Joy's point, seeing additional contributions coming in. So we're expecting to be able to hit the 20,000 pretty soon, quite soon.
So it sounds like everybody's right here. It's a $50,000 match, but 30 of that is going to come through in-kind service, leaving 20
it's a combination.
cash.
And so entities that qualify for it are individuals or organizations. Does that include a city government?
Councilmember Purington and Mayor and Council, yes, we actually were, this was brought to our attention through the foundation to take a look at applying. So it we were, encouraged to apply by the entity itself. So yes, we definitely qualify, and several of their criteria matched well with this project, so that also encouraged us to put the application in.
Sure.
In that case, I would move that we accept, well, I don't know how to read it yet. We approve item 1E on the consent agenda as submitted.
Thank you. Second, Councilmember Triki. Any further discussion? If not, the motion is for approval, item 1E. If in favor, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, nay. Motion passes unanimously. Next separated item is 1F, Transportation Alternatives Program Grant Application of the Parks and Rec Department for the Stagecoach Trail. Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. In the reading, it says the TAP grant will provide 87% funding construct the trail. Great. So that means the city will require to fund 13%, which is $800,000. Normally in our reading, the summary includes where the money is coming from. In this case, it didn't. So the question was asked, and then we received an email from the parks that said the funding as proposed would be part of the public vote on Parks and Recreation Department requested. So in other words, we don't have any of the 800,000. The public's going to vote on this. So my thought is, why should we be approving something when we don't have the money and it's determined on a vote that could be September or November by that matter? So that was my question, but I see Mike is here. Maybe he could fill us in on the rest of the details.
Okay, thank you. Mike Pigg?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. There was no other funding source that we could recognize at the time because all the other funds from PD1 had been committed to other projects, and so that was where we chose to attempt to get the matching funds for the project.
Mike, can you answer the kind of the question, though, of if the money may not come through, why is this necessary or valuable?
So we didn't really explore any other options for the funding since we didn't have another source. I guess we would have to look back at PD1 projects and decide if this ranked lower or higher in the hierarchy and see if there was a way to fund it through PD1.
So if we make the application and we're successful, do we have to accept the money, or are we bound? If we couldn't find the money, in other words, It might be private dollars. At that point, it'd be almost a good problem to have because we would have gotten this very large grant, right? But
Mayor and Council, the way we're proposing it right now is that we're going to be able to provide the match. We have to put in this application to the Department of Transportation and then see if we get awarded the grant with the way it's proposed. So at this point, I would say we need to go forward to get to that point to see if we receive the award, and then we would be able to determine at that point with the match we had locally, how we would proceed. So that would be we don't know if we're going to actually get it until we apply.
And can you just remind us how much that Transportation Alternative Program grant would be if we were successful?
So the total project estimate right now, and obviously we would know till we did a bid what the final cost would be. The total project is $5.5 million. So we're basically, as was said, I think by Councilmember Boyette, 87%, $800,000 would be the local contribution, and the rest of it would be paid through the Transportation Alternatives Program. We have over $6 million, $6.5 million currently that we're eligible to apply for, and so this would be the bulk of that application for funds in this cycle.
Okay, so potentially $4.7 million, 5.5 minus 800, or something in that neighborhood. Perfect world. Any follow-up, Councilmember Boyette, before we go on to other?
I guess, could you bring this back in September before we vote on this? Because we don't even know what the public's going to vote on at this point. We haven't even decided that.
Councilmember Boyette, Mayor and Council, the deadline is April 12th to put this application in, and would highly recommend that we make this application at this time. And because this is our chance with this funding source, with the Transportation Alternatives Program, to get in and see if we can fund it in this manner. But so the answer, I guess, is no, we can't come back in September in terms of us meeting this deadline and trying to move forward with MDT on the application process.
Yeah, but I mean, we'll follow up. This is kind of like my hot water tank may be going out soon, and I better buy it right away, but I don't have any money. I mean, I'm concerned that we're gonna end up stuck with $800,000 with egg on our face saying, well, we gotta cut something to go pay for this. I'm just concerned that we're betting on the come. That's all it is. It doesn't make sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or discussion? Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I move to approve item 1F.
Okay, motion is for approval. Councilmember Shaw, second by Councilmember Ripsis. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember Purington, or I'm sorry, Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I'd like to speak to the motion. I agree with everything Director Friday said. I hear what you're saying, Councilmember Boyette, I do. But I think it would be, as the mayor said, a good problem to have if we have a letter saying, you know, we're able to leverage a relatively small amount of local contribution to achieve a major project that the alternative is we have to come up with $5.5 million to do it, which I think is going to be a lot more difficult than trying to figure out 800,000. So I'd much rather see where this process leads us. As I had a professor that used to say, you know, you take the train to the end of the station and then you make your decision. So let's let the train go to the end of the station would be my pitch. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Purington.
Thank you. I agree with Councilmember Boyette, but I would like to hear the response. You did ask a question, Mr. Mayor, that says, do we have to accept it? I suppose we don't, but what does that do to the city when we apply for grants, but we don't have the money? And if we don't allow, you know, if we don't have the money for it now, or at least in the near future that we know of, that we can even put it in the budget for next year, then I just think that kind of puts egg on our face, is probably where I am at this point with that, too.
So Wyeth, if you can comment, I guess we assume, just as Councilmember Purington said, we don't have to take it, but there might be some political consequences if we were successful and turned it down.
Yeah, Councilmember Purington, Mayor, Council, my understanding is that the process, we would be able to, I don't know if the right term would be to say not accepted, but we'd be able to reevaluate based on the funding that we get allocated, what we, you know, whether we have to then find the other sources or whether we'll even look at other projects if it came to that. There's a certain amount that we're allocated. The challenge here is trying to move it forward. I mean, you're talking about another year out to do the project, but I wouldn't say the egg, I don't see that as being like a major issue, because the city is the one that's getting that allocation and can make determinations then to say, okay, we're gonna have to regroup and then come back. So it's not, you know, lost, and it's not yeah, I guess that's the best I can tell you.
Thank you,
Just one follow-up. So is this funding available every year through TAP? Or is this a 1 in 10-year?
So Councilmember Purington and Mayor and Council, we currently, as of right now have a larger allocation that's due to Billings because they have not awarded this TAP program statewide for like almost 3 years. MDT just hasn't done that. So it's built up, so we have that amount. After this round and this application cycle, then we will receive $700,000 approximately per year going forward to do additional projects. But this right now is the amount in this cycle that we're applying for and that we have access to. So it'll go back to a smaller amount annually after this round.
Thank you, Councilmember Rowan.
Wyeth, while you're here, how many other items in the CIP do you have allocated for the Transportation Alternatives Program?
Councilmember Owen and Mayor and Council, currently if you look across, you're talking about in general, I'd have to look, I think we have about 4 or 5 projects looking out into the future that we would utilize that funding for as we were able to make applications.
Go ahead, Wyatt, I didn't
Yeah,
mean to
no.
cut you off.
So that's approximately thinking about the CIP about where probably we have different pieces that are allocated, different amounts.
I think my concern is, I don't recall the CIP putting them out a number of years. In fact, I think if I recall right, and I may be wrong, the 25th Street Bridge, which has sort of popped up back into the CIP, is planned for this year out of TAP. I'm wondering what is getting bumped because of prioritization of the Stagecoach Trail, or why Stagecoach is being prioritized over other things, given that it is sort of a finite source of funds.
So Councilmember Rowan and Mayor and Council, the Stagecoach Trail has been a priority project above other projects for quite some time. And so that one also, given the amount of funds we have and looking at being able to complete it as, one time, this is the opportunity to do that. When we initially looked at this whole pot of money, we were still looking at the 25th Street Bridge. We also are expecting an application from Lockwood regarding some sidewalk projects, which is also eligible to apply for, and it would be a county project, which this TAP program is city-county. So we're trying to look at the priority of the Stagecoach Trail and then potentially at least one county project with the sidewalks to be able to put a package together and put that forward for this cycle. And that would mean then, we'd be looking at future funding from this and other sources to do some of the other projects.
Thank you, Councilmember Tricky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you have a sense of how competitive this round is going to be? Are we very likely to get it, or?
Councilmember Tricky and Mayor and Council, I guess I don't have, this is a new process that for the first time now, and not to spend a lot of time on this, but there was the past Transportation Alternatives Program was competitive with smaller amounts, and we weren't guaranteed any kind of ongoing allocation. So this is the first time since an older program was in place that we're actually able to apply this way. So I'm not as sure on this cycle till we get through this first one, kind of how that's going to work. But they have changed it.
Kevin.
So, Mayor, I might be a little bit off base, and certainly Wyeth or even Debbie can correct me here, but this isn't a competitive process, to my understanding, that we're using basically our allocation portion that's set towards us. So it's not a competitive type process that we're applying for.
Okay, Councilmember Tricky.
And assuming it did go forward, I know that in a lot of these things, there's like a time frame in which we have to, actually complete it. Do you know what that is?
Councilmember Tricky and Mayor and Council, I would have to double check, but I believe we would need to be, with this application process, and we would expect to be notified of an award this summer, that we have to get the project going into 2024. So next year, it's not a long time frame to get it obligated and actually spend it.
Okay, anything else for Wyeth? Okay, thank you, Wyeth. Any further discussion? Again, the motion is for approval. Councilmember Shaw, seconded by Councilmember Rupsis for approval. Any further discussion? Okay, if in favor of the motion for approval, raise your hand. Voting in favor, Councilmembers Shaw, Gulick, Joy, Cole, Chiriki, Tidswell, Purington, and Rupsis. If voting in opposition, raise your hand. Voting in opposition, Councilmembers Owen and Boyette. Motion passes 8-2. Thank you very much. That concludes item 1F. And also the consent agenda. So brings us then to our regular agenda and item number 2. Denise, would you read item number 2?
Public hearing and first reading ordinance for zone change 1022 located at 630 Logan Lane. Zoning Commission recommends approval and adoption of the 10 criteria.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Nicole.
Hello. This is a parcel on Logan Lane in Billings Heights. It's approximately 7,400 square feet. It's currently zoned neighborhood office. The Zoning Commission held their public hearing on March 7th and is forwarding a recommendation to you of approval of the zone change from neighborhood office to neighborhood mixed use. It does meet the growth policy goals and the Billings Heights neighborhood plan. The neighborhood mixed use is compatible with the adjacent uses and the adjacent zoning. Any site improvements would trigger proportionate compliance with site development standards if and when those happen. And it seems to be an orderly transition from the previous use, which was a business office, and before that it was Downers TV service for many decades there on Logan Lane. Oops, wrong direction. So why the zone change? The Billings Islamic Center purchased this property in August of 2022. The neighborhood office zone district does not allow a religious assembly or civic assembly by right. That zone district requires a special review for that particular use. But the applicants chose to do a zone change instead to the neighborhood mixed use that would allow the use. The site is very small. The potential for development to a very large activity or community center is also small. So the thought was to make this an as-right use of the property. This difference between neighborhood mixed use and neighborhood office is really you start to introduce more service businesses, as well as some retail in a neighborhood mixed use, as well as some of these assembly uses in neighborhood mixed use. Perhaps, there we go. So here's the zoning map, shows the neighborhood office, zoning, 3 parcels. This is the furthest east parcel that's zoned neighborhood office. It's directly adjacent to a heavy commercial zone. One of the challenges of zoning in the Heights was many of these zoning decisions were made prior to the annexation of the property into the city. So there was a lot of piecemeal development and piecemeal zoning, some of which is not very compatible already between uses. But this pattern seems to work for Logan Lane, at least the west end of Logan Lane. There are 2 homes directly to the west in the neighborhood office zone district, and those are allowed by right. On the corner is a gas station and convenience store, and that's in a corridor mixed use 1. North across the street is the Four Seasons Shopping Center, and that's a corridor mixed use 2. So here's the aerial of the property and kind of showing what's all the way around the property right now. As I said, this was Downers TV service for decades, literally, before it was changed to another type of service business, and now the Billings Islamic Center is planning to move in. Here's the subject property. And then looking west on Logan Lane, you can see those adjacent homes and then the Kano Mart on the corner. Looking north and west, this is the Four Seasons Shopping Plaza. It probably looks the same today as it did a month and a half ago with the big piles of snow. And then north and east across Logan Lane, and then west down Logan Lane. Oops. Logan Lane is a connector between Main Street and Bench Boulevard. Part of the Billings Heights neighborhood plan identifies this area as a mixed use that can accommodate both higher density residential as well as businesses and services in the same area. I'd be happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you very much. Questions for Nicole? Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. The 2 previous occupants probably didn't have much citizens parking in front of their place. So when I went out there today, I noticed there's really no parking per se. Does our zoning allow just parking on the street? Is that what they're going to do if they had 10 or 20 people or 50 people?
Well, the south side of Logan Lane is an undeveloped half street. The north side, which is adjacent to Four Seasons Shopping Center, is fully built. It has curbs, gutters, sidewalk already. It's likely when they come in and if they're going to do any interior remodeling, for a change of use, we would look at the parking alternatives at that time. There are a few spaces that are off the street already. There's a garage that's at the back of the property, and there is a driveway there. So we would look at that for some alternatives. We do allow shared parking between uses that are daytime and nighttime uses, specifically religious assembly or civic assembly, and commercial uses like the Four Seasons Shopping Center. So those are all alternatives that are available in case of we need to provide more off-street parking at that time.
Go ahead.
But let's say, pretend a new church is going to go up. Do you not require so many parking places for a new facility versus an older building? Question?
Well, we treat them a little differently through the proportionate compliance requirements of the code. So an existing facility with existing off-street parking spaces changes use. Then we look at how much is off-street already, what is available on-street, if any, because there is no paved shoulder here. We wouldn't normally allow parking on an unpaved boulevard of the city streets. I'm sure people do it in many places, but it wouldn't be recognized as an available on-street parking space. So we would explore the alternatives with them at that time. And we do that for anybody.
Thank you. Councilmember Purington.
So a couple of questions, Nicole, and I'll keep in that vein of the parking. So you're saying that part of the parking can be done in the Four Seasons Shopping Center. Did I hear you correct?
It's one of the alternatives allowed in the parking code as shared parking. So if Four Seasons Shopping Center has excess parking, let's say they have 20 excess spaces, this property owner has 7 spaces off-street, but they need 20. They could sign an agreement with the Four Seasons Shopping Center to have access to up to 13 spaces of their 20 excess spaces.
So they do have to have permission to use?
Oh, right, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not just they can park over there.
That's what I was thinking. So you used the term as right use. Could you define that for me again?
It's permitted without any special additional administrative permission. If somebody could, so for example, I have a mixed residential lot. I can do a single family, a 2-family, a 3-family, or 4-family. I don't come to anybody in addition to just submitting a building permit. So that's the difference between a by right use and a special review use, or a restricted use for separation distances, for example. So those are the differences.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Boyette?
Follow up. Since this is a new use, can we require any street maintenance, curb gutter, finishing the rest of the gravel off? Can we require that as part of just require it?
When they submit a building permit or development permit to update the site or to remodel the structure, that's when the city engineering division looks at the site, and they can either require those improvements or require a waiver of protest to future improvements.
Thank you. Any other questions for Nicole? Nicole, I see that we've got the president of the Islamic Center, La Ghafour, and Imam Adam Malik. I don't know if they wanted to make any comments or presentations. But
they don't have a separate presentation, but I'm sure they can.
Okay.
They will speak to you about the application.
If we had a representative from the Islamic Center and you'd like to say anything, feel free.
Mayor and Council. My name is Jonah Sullivan, and it is my name on the application. As it says in the presentation we just saw from Nicole, we are joined by Ala Abdel Ghafour, who is the named owner on the property, the Billings Islamic Center. He was the agent for that purchase. We're also joined by Dr. Qasim Khan, Dr. Manohar Qureshi, and our Imam Adam Malik, and I would make myself available to answer any questions that we might have about this application or about the Billings Islamic Center.
Any questions for the applicant? Councilmember Pearson?
I guess my only question, go back to the parking thing. What would your normal attendance be, and what sort of hours would you be in attendance there?
So normal attendance, Councilmember Purinton, is pretty slight. We're generally less than 10 people on a normal Friday, which is the day for religious assembly. During certain times of the year, we do have religious festivals where more of the local community would gather. In cases like that, we have some of the options that were mentioned before, the ability to, we so far have great relationships with the neighbors there, and we negotiate to make sure that our use of the property is not placing an undue burden on the city.
Thank you very much. Anything else? Don't see any. Thank you very much. Okay, this is a public hearing, so we'll open it up for public comment at this time. You've heard the presentation. If anybody would like to make comment, please come to the podium. We just ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and address. Is there any public comment on item number 2? Don't see anybody, and coming forward, and there is nobody online, so we'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Owen.
Having conducted a public hearing and considered written and spoken testimony, I move to approve first reading ordinance for zone change 1022 and adopt the findings of the 10 criteria as recommended by the Zoning Commission.
Councilmember Shaw was indicating a second, so motion is for approval. Discussion on the motion. Motion is for approval. Any discussion? Councilmember Shaw.
I just wanted to quickly say one of the notes that jumped out to me in our packet was that we have a number of medical professionals that come to Billings and then end up leaving because they don't have a place to worship or gather. And so I'm very excited about this, and I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? If not, we'll proceed to a vote. The motion is for approval. If in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. If opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. That concludes item 2. Item number 3 is public hearing and first reading on ordinance amending code 18-204. Gina Dahl, our city attorney, is the presenter.
Legal editors been busy.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight you have before you an ordinance which will amend section 18-204 of the city code. It currently prohibits weapons at city council proceedings. We're going to talk about recent legislative changes and how those changes affect the city's current ordinance, current city code, and you will need to conduct a public hearing. And then staff is recommending that you adopt a proposed ordinance amending this section to comport with Montana, with state law and the legislative changes. So first, just a little bit of background. As I think you all know, Montana is an open carry state. Anyone may openly carry firearms anywhere except within school buildings if it's been prohibited by the local school district. The other exception is within a publicly owned and occupied building if it's been prohibited by the local government. The other exceptions, as you'll see up there, are the minors under 14, unless they're under the charge or custody of the parent, felons convicted of certain offenses. There are some limited exceptions there, and then, as I said, within school buildings. So in 2019, so the first legislative change we're going to talk about is the legislative referendum 130. In 2019, the legislature passed Senate Bill 357, which directed this legislative referendum to be placed on the ballot. It was passed by the voters in November of 2020, and it became effective January 1st, 2021. So LR 130 generally just restricts a local government unit's authority to regulate the carrying of firearms. Montana law previously allowed a local government to regulate the carrying of concealed or unconcealed weapons to public assemblies, publicly owned buildings, parks under its jurisdiction, or schools. A couple other minor exceptions, or a couple other things they could regulate were certain things, possession of firearms by convicted felons, adjudicated people with mental illness or mental disease or defect, illegal aliens and minors. But LR 130 removed a local government's power to regulate the carrying of permitted concealed weapons, or to restrict the carrying of unconcealed firearms, except in publicly owned and occupied buildings under the local government's jurisdiction. And it also stated that any local ordinance that conflicted with LR 130 could not be enforced. And we're going to talk about our ordinance here in just a minute. In addition to LR 130, House Bill 102 was passed, and that was effective February 2021, and fully effective June of 2021. There were some portions which were effective earlier. So House Bill 102 further limited local government's ability to restrict both concealed and permitted concealed, so permitted, unpermitted concealed weapons. The legislation essentially allows permitless concealed carry to any person who is eligible to possess a firearm under state or federal law anywhere in the state. It also restricted local government's authority over permitted concealed weapons, carriers or permitted concealed weapons, and provided limited exceptions to both. House Bill 102 also provided a cause of action, civil cause of action, against the local government for violations of certain portions of House Bill 102, for a person to recover civil damages, costs, and attorney fees. House Bill 102 also removed the list of prohibited places, which previously, under Montana, previously included things like banks, credit unions, bars. And now, as you see in this slide, a person can carry anywhere in the state except for this list of places: jails, courtrooms, private property at the discretion of the owner, federal buildings, law enforcement facilities. The penalty for concealed carry without a permit is $500 fine, 6 months in jail, or both. And prior to the change, this penalty applied to any concealed carry, permitted or not. However, now under House Bill 102, the penalty does not apply to a person with a permit or a person eligible to possess a firearm under state or federal law. So a person who is permitted or eligible to obtain a permit is not subject to the penalty. If you're wondering what eligible to, so there's, you have a concealed weapons permit or you're eligible. A person is eligible. What that essentially means is you're a permanent citizen, you're either a citizen of the country or you're a permanent resident. You're 18 years of age or older. You have a valid ID or state driver's license. You have to be a resident of the state for 6 months. You have to be considered eligible under Montana or federal law to own, possess, or receive a firearm. And that essentially just means if you're not convicted, some of those other things I talked about before, if you're not a felon under supervision or had been adjudicated under some other statute that says you can't possess a weapon. Other criteria for, other criteria, if you don't have, you're eligible if you don't have a warrant, I guess ineligible if you have a warrant from the state or the federal government, convicted of certain types of offenses, generally the weapons enhancement type of offenses within the state. You're not under, you haven't been adjudicated in the court as being mentally ill. You're not an unlawful user of intoxicating substances. So essentially, even if you don't have a concealed carry permit and you are eligible to go get a permit, then those penalties that I discussed a minute ago don't apply to you. So some limitations do remain after the passage of House Bill 102. One that's not up there is the federal background check and waiting period. That still is a limitation that still exists. The other two are up there. If a local government has restricted unpermitted concealed carry in a publicly owned and occupied building, then a person cannot conceal carry in those facilities. The other is if a person cannot conceal carry in portions of a building used for state or local government offices. State law still has an offense that prohibits concealed carry in those locations. Okay, so what does this do to our city code? What does it mean for our current city code? This is the current version of the prohibition language that's under section 18-204. It's currently subsection C. So as you can see, it says the carrying or possession of weapons, firearms, or destructive devices at Billings City Council proceedings by any person except law enforcement personnel is prohibited. This language is, it prohibits any weapons at all, any firearms, and only at city council proceedings. It's not a general prohibition for city facilities. And under Montana law, we're no longer allowed to regulate public assemblies. That language was taken out, and was replaced with the language that I talked about here. It removed those language and replaced it with new ones. So public assemblies cannot be regulated. The ordinance must regulate based on the changes I've mentioned already, which are if it's a publicly owned and operated building, or whether it is a state or local government office, houses state or local government offices. So that's our current version, and so I handed out to you all a copy of the red line version and the clean version so that you could look at that. The reason I'm handing you out a new copy is because over the weekend, the mayor made a couple suggestions to clarify some language. So this new copy shows you the sections that are highlighted. It's highlighted in yellow, the language that is not contained in the packet that came out to you last Tuesday. So this language, it will, as amended, the ordinance amended it and adjusted it, so it's not 18-204 subsection C, it's now 18-204 subsection B, with that has the prohibition language. And so the first portion of it, as you can see there in front of you, the open carry of a firearm or possession of an unpermitted concealed firearm by any person in a city facility is prohibited. We had to change that from city council proceedings to a city facility because that is how the state law allows local governments to now regulate. The second portion says the open or concealed carry of other weapons and destructive devices by any person in a city facility is prohibited. This language is carryover from the previous version. Basically, other weapons are defined in the ordinance as well under subsection A5, I believe it is. And it defines other weapons as knives, dirks, daggers, billy clubs, razors, throwing stars, nunchucks, all those kinds of things, or other deadly weapon or destructive device. And destructive device, as you'll see, is also defined under, I think it's subsection A2. So the rest of this states, a person with a valid permit to carry a concealed firearm issued under Montana law is prohibited from carrying a concealed firearm in restricted areas of a city facility as set forth in state law, and that is those sections that I told you here. They're specifically defined, the prohibited places. So we just referenced state law here under where it says as set forth in 45-8-356. So the reason this language is this way is because a person, if you have a concealed carry permit, you can essentially carry anywhere except for those places. Those are the only places that you can't carry, and local governments essentially can't regulate a permitted concealed weapon carry. So the last section that's in the red font and is highlighted is another bit that was added at the suggestion of the mayor to just clarify that airports are also included, that those are prohibited places too once you're beyond the security checkpoints. The last section I wanted to point out that's different from the agenda packet is 18-204 subsection D. We have added a section for screening that wasn't in the prior city code, but is necessary to be able to enforce any of this. So the only thing that's different and why I'm showing it to you is because the yellow highlighted section is different. And initially the version listed out all of what those violations would be, but for clarity's sake and more consistency, and so as to not have any inconsistencies between the two sections, we just clarified that to be if you violate the article as set forth previously, what that is referencing is 18-204 subsection B, which is the prohibition section that I just showed you. So that's just the new language that the city staff may screen people and may require them to present their permit, their concealed carry permit, and if they don't provide that, then they could be denied access to the facility. So that is that's the ordinance, that's a draft of the proposed ordinance for you. Just one other thing I wanted to mention, that this is just, this modified ordinance is just a part, I guess, of safety planning that the city staff is developing for internal operations involving city council as well. You're gonna be seeing some proposals in the near future that include best practices for council chamber security and some recommendations for meeting protocol to protect council members before, during, and after meetings. The plans and the things you'll see are gonna be focusing on physical security as well as decorum and, decorum to enhance security and meeting management. And so you can look forward to seeing that relatively soon. And that's all I have, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Gina, for working on this. Obviously, these things are sadly necessary in today's world. We're all reminded of what happened in Nashville, Tennessee today, and mass shooting number 189 for the year, whatever it is. So, again, thank you for working on this. I'm sure we'll have some questions. Councilmember Puring, Councilmember Boyette.
So, Gina, I'm kind of confused.
It's very confusing.
Well, because, in short, the state legislature has now said that local governments can prohibit open carry and concealed weapon permit carry within a city-owned facility.
I want to make sure I heard you right,
Okay.
Councilmember Purington. Yes, the legislation says that local governments can regulate open carry in a publicly owned or occupied building, and unpermitted concealed carry. Cannot regulate permitted concealed carry.
That's what I was trying to get at, because that's kind of where I was hearing that. So whenever it says in D, section D, that the city may require a person to present their concealed weapon permit, then you have to show it. You don't have to show the gun, you have to show the permit. Is that correct?
Well, I would presume that if you're being screened, that the person screening you has discovered the firearm, so that's why they're asking for the permit.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so just to be perfectly clear, what you're asking in this ordinance is that the city is prohibiting open carry or unpermitted concealed.
That's correct.
And then you made the comment about eligible. So where does that put that eligible person? In the unpermitted section of it, or does that?
It generally does, yes. If they are permitted, then they have a permit, obviously, and if they're eligible to carry, then they could be permitted if they went through the process, but they haven't, so they're eligible to carry under state and federal law, and that's where the penalties, that's where the enforcement is kind of taken out of the law, that there's not a whole lot of enforcement action that can be taken if somebody is carrying concealed and is not permitted, and that's a violation of our city code. There's, it's difficult to enforce under state law right now.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Councilmember Boyette?
Thank you, Mayor. Gina, then it says prohibited from carrying from restricted areas, so would we have to, if let's say this was approved, would we have to go put restricted area on certain, this building, this room? We'd have to redo the city?
I think really the only really restricted areas that are going to apply here for us is going to be the police department, which people don't have access to anyways, because it's a secure area. So I don't know if there is signage up for that. I don't think that they do have signage, but that would be that's easily regulated because they're secure. And then the courtroom is the other area that I think there should, if there's not already a sign on the door, there could be, and there should be likely. It's also under this new legislation, it also allows a judge to issue an order for, to regulate the area that court personnel uses. So Judge Collard could potentially issue an order saying, no weapons concealed or unconcealed allowed in the courtroom or areas that court personnel use. And then she would just need to justify what that, is that the hallways, the whole third floor, or second floor? I guess we're on the second floor. So there would just need to be a court order for that. Yep. And signage. It would be appropriate to put a sign on the door or wherever. But we did recently put up signs, and that's the other thing I meant to mention. So you've probably seen the signs recently. I think they're green, no, they're pink, that clarify, because our current ordinance was banning everything, was prohibiting everything, but we couldn't enforce that. So we put the signs up to clarify what we could enforce, which was open carry and unpermitted concealed. So that's what those signs are. And that's what we're bringing you here now. It's just clarify what we can enforce compared to our current city code.
Thank you, Councilmember Triki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Ms. Dahl, so can you clearly tell us what the consequences for the city would be if, for example, we were to try to keep firearms out of a public assembly or a city park or a schoolyard?
Well, local government is not allowed to regulate that anymore. That was taken out by this legislation. The local governments cannot regulate based on a public assembly. You have to regulate based on.
I understand that. What I'm asking is, what are the consequences to the city if we should go against that?
You're asking if you would enact an ordinance that is not allowed under Montana law? Well, I would advise you not to do that. I mean, I would hope that you wouldn't get there because.
I would hope that you would advise us not to do that.
There's
yes.
no way to enforce that, so.
I'm just wondering, within the state code, what kind of consequences have they put in there for cities that dare to defy them?
Well, I suspect that the most common thing would be a civil suit. This legislation did include a cause of action for persons who have certain parts of House Bill 102, like generally it applies to the school, not the school boards, but the Montana University system, that lawsuit that just recently occurred. The cause of action that was included generally applied to those if your rights were infringed upon by the Montana University system. Essentially, this created a cause of action for you for a civil suit to recover damages, attorneys' fees, and costs. It didn't create a specific cause of action for any other violations, but that doesn't mean a civil cause of action doesn't exist.
So basically, they made us more susceptible to a lawsuit for violating someone's rights to have a gun.
Well, I don't know if the legislature made local governments more apt to be liable, but it did narrow local government's ability to regulate. So you just have to be more careful.
Thank you. Other questions for Gina? Councilmember Purinton.
One more clarification. Whenever you were talking about Judge Kolar and putting restrictions on where this would be in place, just because this facility right here is a courtroom during the day, but city council at night, what she said during the day doesn't apply for at night. Is that correct? Is it the use also?
Well, I want to find the statute so I don't misquote it, but my understanding of the code is that it's a courtroom and not that it doesn't specifically talk about use, but I think a reasonable interpretation is that it's being used as a courtroom because it allows local it doesn't allow local government regulation. It is specifically defined, a courtroom is specifically defined as a prohibited place. And then additional language at the end of that code section says, or other areas used by court personnel as provided by court order. So courtroom, prohibited place, other areas used by court personnel, if a court orders it, can become a prohibited place as well. So it doesn't say a courtroom used for any purpose, it just says a courtroom. So there could be an argument made that this is a courtroom, even though it's not being used as a courtroom, weapons are prohibited here, but I don't think that that was the intent of the statute. It doesn't clearly state that in the law, it just says a courtroom is a prohibited place.
Okay. Councilmember Shaw?
Thank you. Gina, would you just clarify for the public, anybody listening, if I think it's a little difficult to understand the layers of government and what we're allowed to do locally and the state. And so if somebody reached out to you and said, I really disagree with allowing guns in City Hall at all, for instance, we should be directing them to the state legislature at that point. Is that correct? Because our ability to do anything on the local level has pretty much been stripped from us. Am I stating that correctly?
I think that's pretty accurate.
Okay.
I mean, your hands as city council members are pretty tied as to the regulations that you can impose.
Okay, and so all this does really is just put us in line with what the state law is currently.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything further for Gina before we open up for public hearing? Okay, thank you, Gina. This is a public hearing, so if anybody would like to comment on item number 3, please come forward. Just ask to keep your comments to 3 minutes and tell us your name and your address, please. Is there anybody who'd like to comment on item number 3? This is a public hearing. There's nobody online. Nobody is rushing to the podium, so we're going to close the public hearing. Public hearing is closed. Back to council. Council, how would you like to proceed? Is there further questions, motions, discussion? Councilmember Purrington.
Thank you. I know that you asked the question, Mr. Mayor, about council members who have permitted carry. So what does that do for city council members? Would this allow council members to continue carrying because they have a permit? I see.
You see nodding heads, but nobody actually saying it out loud. But
okay.
Gina, can you address that? And
That's correct, Councilmember Purington. The regulations allow concealed carry, permitted concealed carry. For anybody. Mm-hmm.
I still don't get that courtroom thing, though.
Well,
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
So if this is designated as a courtroom, and Joe, because even Judge Kolar cannot go against the concealed weapon thing. If you have a concealed weapon permit, you can carry. Is that right?
not in a courtroom. That's the statute. Okay, let me read it to you so that I don't misquote. And I think I already spoke incorrectly. And with all the permitted and unpermitted, it gets very confusing. So I'm just going to read it to you. A person with a current and valid permit issued under Montana law may not be prohibited or restricted from exercising that permit anywhere in the state except for, and there are eight exceptions. And the number 7 says, so a person that has a valid permit may not be prohibited or restricted from exercising that permit anywhere in the state except for a courtroom, within a courtroom, or an area of a courthouse in use by court personnel pursuant to an order of a judge. So a courtroom is a prohibited, even if you have a permit, a concealed carry permit. It is a prohibited place.
Okay.
That makes sense?
It does make sense, but it also says in use by court personnel.
Well,
Court personnel.
right, it's poorly written, and the way I read it, which is it's up for interpretation. The way I read it is, it's within a courtroom, that's done, that's absolute, I mean, there's no punctuation there, so that's just my argument. But then it says, or an area of a courthouse in use by court personnel. So I don't think that, I think a courtroom is generally presumed to be used as a courtroom, and that's why I say, I don't think, when you are using it as council chambers, I think it's considered council chambers. It's not considered a courtroom. I mean, I think that was the intent of the statute.
Okay, Councilmember Tidswell?
Is that further separated when we hit Stillwater and we have our own chambers? I mean, is that distinction further separated, courtroom, council chambers?
Yes, I mean, you won't be using a courtroom. The same regulations will be in place at the new City Hall building. Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Boyette?
I'd like to move on with this and make a motion, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken testimony, I move to approve the first reading ordinance amending Billings, Montana, City Code Section 18-204, prohibiting weapons, firearms, and explosives at City Hall proceedings as recommended by staff.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second? Councilmember Joy? Okay, thank you. Councilmember Boyette, you want to speak to your motion?
Yes, sir, thank you. The way I read it, it says, within a courtroom or an area of the courthouse in use by court personnel or ordered by the judge. There's no judge here. This isn't a courtroom right now. This is the city council members' chamber. And once we get to the new city hall, we will have our own council chamber, and we won't be in there. So I'm going to take it at its face value that this means this isn't a courtroom.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. After having given an invocation, I feel very impacted by what's happening in public safety in our community. I feel very impacted. And I am the second on this. It seemed to be a little bit reluctant on the part. We have to comply with state law. That's just the order of things. I feel I was certainly disappointed to see that our elected leaders chose to do things that I consider impacting safety, because I really feel quite strongly that this legislation and now state law impacts our public safety. As a city council, our ability and our power to regulate has been taken from us. We have to abide by what is current state law, but that doesn't mean it can't change. And we are all powerful. We are empowered by our Constitution and by our own charter to make the communities that we want. So as it stands right now, this is the law and we must abide by it. So I feel confident in my second that we are doing the right thing, but deep in my heart, I feel very impacted by weapons. I feel impacted by our public safety, and I don't like to see our community turn into this. And we certainly need to feel empowered to create the community we want that is safe by changing what we can change to make our community safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councilmember Triki?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Yes, our code needs to be in sync with state law. Absolutely. Having two different things out there is confusing. People won't know which one to follow, which one is right. So they have to be in sync. And I thank staff for the hard work that they've put into this and trying to figure out how to turn this into a city ordinance. But I have to take this moment to talk for a moment about making public policy based on principles and not outcomes. Yes, principles are incredibly important. They're very important. I'm not going to go into it in any depth, but yes, I have often taken stands on principles. The thing to think about here is that there are often conflicting principles that are involved. And frankly, that leads us to the question of when do we start weighing the consequences of making public policy based on those principles? Just the episodes that happened today here, not here, but this weekend here and in Nashville today, indicates that there are very, very, very serious consequences for making policy based on principles without stopping to think about the consequences that has and happens. That said, I cannot, in good conscience, support anything which puts more guns in the hands of more people in more places here in Billings today. So I will very reluctantly go against the bureaucrat in me and stand on a principle and say, hey, enough is enough. We need to start figuring out how to bring our violent episode here in the United States and here in Billings under control. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Puritan.
Well, I may be the only Lone Ranger here talking about this, but for one thing, there is a thing as the U.S. Constitution, because each one of us are right to bear arms. Bearing arms, we protect ourselves. All of these incidents that have been spoken about, the people with guns were the ones that were the criminals. They were perpetuating violence against innocent people. Innocent people have every right to defend themselves. So I take a different view of this. I don't think the violence is caused by upstanding citizens who have guns to protect themselves, whether they're open carry or they're concealed weapon permits. I'm almost more inclined to see an open carry because then I know they have it. Concealed weapons, you don't know they have it. But this state law came about because one community in Montana decided that they wanted to come up with a local ordinance. So that made it very inconsistent throughout the state. So just for me standing on principle, I will vote against this ordinance. I understand it. I appreciate what the city is trying to do, but I feel like we have to be very careful in who we're trying to take guns away from. So, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Tidswell.
Shall not be infringed is non-negotiable. I won't support this.
Okay, Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you. A comment for Gina. Let's say we don't pass this ordinance. Are we opening ourselves up to a big lawsuit then? Because we're not following state law?
Mayor, Councilmember Boyette, we have an ordinance, we have city code in place that bans all weapons right now. And so if you don't approve it, that remains in effect. And we can only enforce the portions that we can enforce. And so that means that we will continue to enforce you can't open, it will have the same effect because we will continue to enforce that you can't open carry and you can't unpermitted concealed carry because currently everything is banned. We just can't enforce the permitted concealed carry.
Councilor Boyette?
But do we open ourselves up for any legal issues? That's my question.
Well, potentially, because when your code doesn't comport with state law, if somebody mistakenly, a law enforcement officer or somebody mistaken, a city staff mistakenly tries to enforce the portion that they can't enforce, then yes, potentially. So it's best to just amend this in some fashion that comports with state law.
Councilor Bertricki?
I just want to make it really clear that this ordinance change is not making it more restrictive to have guns. It is making it less restrictive to have guns. And it is putting us in line with the state code, which is making it less restrictive for us to have guns.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Before we proceed to a vote, we'll do it by a hand tally. Again, the motion is for approval. Any further discussion before we proceed to a vote? Okay, I don't see any. So again, the motion brought by Councilmember Boyette, second by Councilmember Joy, is for approval of the staff recommended version that you received at the beginning of the meeting, and copies of which are available if anybody, we'll get you one if anybody wants one. Is the motion clear before we proceed to a vote? Okay, so if in favor of the motion for approval, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are Councilmembers Shaw, Gulick, Owen, Joy, Cole, Boyette, and Rupsis. If voting against, please raise your hand. Voting against are council members Treaky, Tidswell, and Purrington. I think that means it passes 7-3. Thank you very much, council. That resolves that item and brings us to the end of our regular agenda and brings us to public comment on non-agenda items. So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to comment on something that was not on our agenda tonight, please come forward. Just ask that you tell us your name and keep your comments to 3 minutes and your address also.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Zach Tarakidas, 302 Clark Avenue. Tonight I'm here in representation of Substance Abuse Connect. What I'm asking for is council support on something that's going on tomorrow. Substance Abuse Connect is a coalition of organizations. The executive committee we have in place is School District 2, Billings Police Department, Yellowstone County Sheriff, Billings Clinic, St. Vincent Healthcare, Yellowstone County Commissioners, and the City of Billings as our executive decision-making body. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., County Commissioner Morse is recommending that they want to cancel the contracts of a 5-year agreement 45 days prior to the end of the first year of completion for the mental health mill levy, Yellowstone County mental health mill levy dollars. What we're asking for is to them to complete this first year so that we can present full data about what we've accomplished. Currently, we're on track of meeting all metrics from the organizations that are involved in Substance Abuse Connect and addressing the challenges we have in our community currently. When this was passed in 2010, it is a resolution to impose a mill levy for the provision of mental health services to assist law enforcement and reduce the detention center population subject to a majority of the voters approving the mill levy, et cetera, et cetera. And so we were a little bit taken aback on Thursday when it was told that we were going to cut the contract short by 45 days. I have, again, said, please give us the time so that we can make a recommendation for the next step going forward, which includes 80+ organizations in the county that provide mental health, behavioral health, and substance abuse services. Once again, we're just asking for the additional timeline, that we're not canceling contracts in a fairly arbitrary way. We're not really understanding why, when we're on track to meet those metrics, that we would stop that contractual agreement. So we're just looking for support from the council generally as a whole that says, as a partner of Substance Abuse Connect, these are good goals. These are things were established through an RFP process that were approved unanimously last April by the whole of the county commissioners.
Thank you. So, Zach, that meeting is at the Stillwater Building, the old federal courthouse, the Batten Building, at 9 o'clock, 3rd floor tomorrow. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And just clarify the contract or deal. It was on a month-to-month basis. It wasn't for an entire year.
It was for an entire, actually, the first year was 14 months just because of the timing of when they set that up. So it was April of last year to June 30 of this year. And then it would go on an annual basis. And so our recommendation was that we would bring them in May because their budgeting is a little bit different than the budgeting we have here. I asked about that at our last monthly report and said, when can we make that recommendation? I said I would bring it to you in May so that you're set up to make that next year's fiscal distribution, which doesn't need to be the same as what we have right now. We're evaluating the data that we're collecting with a third party for the work that's being done.
So just as a legal matter, though, if it was for a year, does the county have the legal ability to cut it short? Was there something provision in there that says it's a year unless we feel otherwise?
60-day notice, but.
Oh, okay. It allows for termination anytime with 60 days notice.
Well.
Maybe.
Okay. That's the interpretation we're up against right now is,
all right,
it doesn't say specifically for no reason.
Okay. Questions for Zach, Councilmember Purrington?
So Zach, this is just the first year of a 5-year contract, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Rowan?
Just so I'm understanding, if they vote to cancel the contract tomorrow, you then have 60 days essentially to wind up, right?
That's correct.
But at the end of those 60 days, you could present your data still.
Yes, it depends on best practice of, are people going to continue doing the work? Because financially, it has no impact. Our final invoice goes in, we're in the quarter, we've always do it at the beginning of the quarter. So there's no financial repercussions to the organizations or anything else. I mean, in that 60 days, they'll still get, so it's really just a matter of, I mean, if we're trying to complete the work, we're going to complete the work, obviously, but what's the incentive to continue on when there's really no reason to present those results? But yes, we want to present the next step of, hey, this would be the best thing to do.
So that's sort of what I'm getting at. Based on what you know now, is the intention then to take these dollars in a different direction that you could compete for, or is the intention not to levy this mill?
The levy will continue. Prior to last April, there was not an RFP process for mental health services. So it was the first time that there was a presentation. Prior to that, it was mental health center, the hub, and the crisis center. Currently, the crisis center is also part of our efforts with SAC, and the mental health center, with the relationship building we've done in the last 4 months, are back to the table to talk about, what it is we need to do collectively. In addition, I presented that the state has moved towards funding collaborative efforts in coalitions because they can leverage their dollars further. If the funding was to be cut, we just received the crisis diversion grant that's backdates to January of this year for 18 months. There is a portion of that is matched through the mental health mill levy dollars as a match. Could have an impact to not allow all of those dollars to come in, but we did match against some other things as well to diversify that.
Last question, Mayor.
Go ahead.
If I remember correctly, when originally passed by the voters, this mental health mill levy was specifically directed at reducing jail populations.
The mill levy for the provision of mental health services to assist law enforcement and reduce the detention center populations, et cetera, subject to the voters' approval.
So whenever you all present your final data, your intention is to show how these funds have reduced jail populations?
Have provided services that should be diverting people out. Substance Abuse Connect has 2 pillars, and the one pillar is treatment and diversion, and that's where all of these efforts are being done, is diverting people with mental health, behavioral health, and substance abuse issues, which substance abuse is a mental health disorder.
Yep.
To divert them from the system.
But just to be clear, are we actually able to show data that the work of the coalition is keeping people out of detention facilities?
That's what we're collecting. I mean, it's directly against the plan that was put up for us. So yes, I would say yes, that's accurate.
Thanks, Zach.
Thank you. Anything else for Zach? So Zach, your request though is that we just show up. Is that true? Or anybody who's interested?
Yes, as a body, that we agree that this would be something to continue forth. And again, it's to get to the end of this first year so that we're not, again, artificially cutting off the timeline, because I'm not sure what that means to the community, but it doesn't show a great amount of faith even as an executive committee, that one entity is no longer taking part in the process.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Shaw.
I was going to ask a similar question, but just with the timeline is so short, what is the best way to get that information to you? Do you want us to email you individually? I mean, what would be the most helpful?
Mr. Mayor, can I address that?
Would that be okay, Councilmember Shaw? Okay, so, and Zach, we'll hear from you, but Councilmember Purton?
Well, it might not be a bad idea. But, so what the plan was is that I was wanting to ask council if you are in agreement with Zach, is that I would go to the commissioners meeting. It's at 9:30, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, 9:30, okay. Sorry.
That I would go, and I put that out to the council in an email. And the mayor said he would go. And then I think Danny said that he would go as well. So there's basically 3 of us. Anyone else can come. And it's just during public comment on that item. And I think it's basically to support what Zach is saying. Who serves on the executive committee from the city? Is that Chris?
Chris Kukowski, yes.
Okay. So I just think there needs to be an open, transparent movement going forward with this as to what we want to do, what they want to do, what the commissioners want to do, what SAC thinks that, their trajectory that they're on. That's kind of where I'm at with a lot of this. I don't have a lot of specifics because I don't think it's been transparent, to be real honest. So I'm hoping that we can go and just support SAC as it moves forward. If there's things that the commissioners are concerned about, then that's the meeting that needs to happen, you know? So I don't have any definite plan of action. I just hope they do.
Councilmember Shaw or Zach, do you want to add to
And I
that?
guess I would expand it too, that if you can't make it, a letter directly to all the county commissioners, because I think it's not a singular, the county commissioners generally saying, consider completing this process all the way through.
Just as a sort of procedural point, we are kind of in the middle of public comment. I have some other things I'd like to discuss on this, so can we continue this in council initiatives? And can Zach stick around?
Sure.
Yeah, I
I think we
appreciate
ought to give the
that.
public the time for comment,
You
and then
bet.
we can come back to
We'll come
this.
back to that, so if that's okay. Yeah, we are public comment on non-agenda items, so.
Mayor, council, good evening. Jacqueline Garcia, 836 Dorothy Lane. I wanted to thank everyone for their help last week when I was talking about all the gravel all over the sidewalk. And Tina has let everyone know in the area that they need to start cleaning it up, which is really awesome because I like walking on beautiful days with my kids. So I wanted to thank you guys all for your help on that. And Mr. Toriki, there's a lot that I agree with and a lot I don't agree with. But taking guns from law-abiding citizens, taking our right to protect ourselves and others. I'm not gonna just protect myself. I'm gonna protect the person standing next to me too. So if you wanna remove that right, that's not fair. That is not Montanan at all. That is not what we love about this great state. We get to protect ourselves and our loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on items not on our agenda tonight? Before we close the public comment period. Okay, we'll close the public comment period on non-agenda items and brings us to initiatives. Council Owen, you want to come back to that?
Yeah, I think we can go ahead. I didn't know if there wanted to be further discussion on council action on Substance Abuse Connect. I have some thoughts about it, but I certainly would not want to hijack either Pam or Kendra or Danny or others who sort of led this conversation.
Councilmember Boyette.
I would jump into, but.
I just didn't want to do anything until I have all the facts. I don't want to be saying, yes, I want it, or no, I don't. I don't know enough about what was going on. I mean, my thought was if we go to the commissioners meeting and at least listen to what their side of the story before I get too far involved. I mean, I don't know enough.
Councilmember Shaw, and then back to Councilmember Owen.
Yeah, my recommendation would be that Substance Abuse Connect finishes out at least a year. I mean, I think that's what they're asking for out of a 5-year contract. That seems pretty reasonable to me. So I would, I guess, make a motion to support that, and then anyone who's able to attend the meeting tomorrow can speak on behalf of council if we vote thumbs up or thumbs down.
Okay, so you always have this problem with these initiatives, which I do not like. They just pop up, without any notice to the public. But the motion is for the council to vote to express general, putting words in your mouth, so you'll want to correct this if I get it wrong, to communicate to the Board of County Commissioners tomorrow general support for the Substance Abuse Connect program at this stage, and not to see the termination of the grant dollars at this stage.
To at least let them, I think what they're asking is to at least let them finish a year, right? And then bring the data, and then whatever happens, I agree with you. I don't know enough. I don't know what the commissioners are thinking. We couldn't speculate on that.
For at least the year period.
Finish it for the year, and then we will have the information to actually, hopefully, help evaluate.
Okay, since the motion was made, I do need to ask if there's a second. Second by Councilmember Joy. So let's have discussion. We'll turn it, we'll let people who made the motion speak to it and then go to Councilmember Owen. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. One of the 33 questions as to whether or not you need to expand a jail is whether or not you are diverting people who have mental health issues out of your jail. Incarceration is not an effective mental health solution. It can be when if the public, if that person is a danger to the public or to themselves. But as a broader statement, mental health is not effectively treated simply by incarceration. It does protect the community and that person, but as a treatment for mental health, it does not work. So that's one of the 33 questions. That is something that a community, not me, or council member, but as a community, we need to address. I hope to see the data and what Substance Abuse Connect has really been working on to divert, since that is the purpose of the mill levy. And also I want to sort of say, I'm not sure where the county commission is going with this, but when county voters approve a mill levy, they're saying this is important to us. And so I would hope that the county, the entire population, would speak up. If this is what we've asked for, then what should it look like? And what those proposals are to address the issue that is funded through the mill levy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Rowan, can you make your comments in like this context now that there is a motion on the table?
Amazingly well, actually, Mayor. I think I find myself in maybe a slightly different nuance from where Councilmember Joy is. I agree, there is an inherent link between the efficacy of diversion programs and the existence of incarceration. And I don't think we can do one without the other. And so if we only have an incarceration strategy, we will fail this community. There are people who will take up beds who do not need to be there and will not get served there and may in fact get worse. Conversely, if we don't have adequate incarceration, diversion won't work. Because while we may be able to address people who are incarcerated by having on-site mental health and substance abuse services, those out on the street, I mean, we heard the chief say tonight, utter contempt for law and justice. And part of that is because there's an insufficient strategy around the jail system. So I think it's time for us to do both. If there's going to be a rally on behalf of Substance Abuse Connect, we ought to be equally loud in demanding a jail needs assessment, and we should demand it now. I think it's time for us to send a letter to the commission saying, we're here. We have voted to evaluate our prosecution and court system. We're asking you to take a look at your piece of it, which is the justice system and the incarceration side of it. I don't think we can be silent on this anymore. I think we've tried to sort of be patient and wait, and I think people in my ward are getting hurt. And people in other wards are getting hurt, and I'm not willing to be quiet on it anymore. So if I go tomorrow, that would be what I would want to say to commission is, Substance Abuse Connect has its role, and the mental health mill levy has its role. It's essential for diversion, and the county has said we want diversion, but we cannot have diversion if we don't have incarceration. The time for a jail needs assessment is now, and I think it's time that we start linking those two. We have to address public safety comprehensively. Council, I believe, has a duty to step up and be louder. So I would like to talk about a draft letter expressing a support for a jail needs assessment. I think we should commit that we will help and support and be a part of that conversation, and that conversation takes place in a larger context of looking at our entire system. It's not fair to simply target diversion or simply target incarceration. These are intertwined and they need to go together. And then just as a final aside, I really do want to give Zach some compliments. I think he's done an excellent job as the new leader of not being defensive on behalf of Substance Abuse Connect, welcoming inquiry and tough questions. I think he'll do a fine job defending the coalition tomorrow. And I think it's important that we have people who are willing to be candid, much more transparent and open, and much more results oriented. So just really want to commend you on hitting the ground running in these early days.
Thank you very much. I just want to comment that I couldn't second Councilmember Owen's sentiments more. Agree 100%. Zach, also just want to ask you for some clarification, and not necessarily now, because you're going to have to look at the documents, but this issue of notice, where we're at technically with this contract. I heard 45 days, then the contract expires, is my understanding, but I also heard something about a 60-day notice. So if it's a situation where the county commissioners is required to give 60 days notice and they just give it tomorrow, the contract will continue through that 60-day period, which means that it's going to go through the 45-day period, which means it's going to continue through the end of the 1 year. They're not actually terminating the contract. They're just voting maybe to not renew it. And that's not inconsistent with what I heard the motion to be, which is to voice support through the end of a 1 year period. If they waited until the end of the 1 year to give a 60-day notice, that would guarantee Substance Abuse Connect an additional 60 days beyond the 1 year. So I don't know if it's clear or not.
Yep, I can clarify for you. So if they cancel the contract tomorrow, which is, the discussion was on this past Thursday about that idea, but it was put onto tomorrow's agenda. So on March 28th, and these letters were sent out ahead of time, which I'm not sure about that, but on March 28th, 2023, the Yellowstone County Board of Commissioners says made the decision, which hasn't happened yet, to terminate the contract. The county intends for the termination to be effective May 29th, 2023, which is about 45 days prior to the end of the fiscal year, which is when the contract ends on June 30th of 2023. That's the 45-day gap. So they're giving us 60 days, but then, is that right? Am I doing the math right? Yeah. So it'll take us to May 29th, this is the 60-day notice period, but there's still 45 days left that we're trying to get to the end of the contract, because that's the end of where it is currently. They're canceling it.
Okay, so what I think I'm hearing you say is they voted to terminate.
They have not voted to
terminate. Okay, this is, okay, it's just on, but the possible motion would be to terminate.
Correct.
To be effective, whatever it was, 60 days in the future.
Yep, May 29th would be 60 days.
Okay.
But the end of the contract was written as June 30th, 2023.
Gotcha. So they would have made the decision based on what you just read. It's not just a notice that we will look at your data in that 60-day period. The deal is done as of tomorrow, potentially. It just doesn't become effective, or the termination doesn't become effective for that 2-month period, if that's a little clearer.
Oh, great.
A little bit, okay, thank you. Okay, so we have a motion in front of us, and Councilmember, I didn't hear you voicing any objection to the motion, per se.
I don't have an objection to the motion, but
Just
I would sure love a conversation about whether or not we can link these two things together.
Okay.
I was about to say, I would be very happy to work on a letter with you, and going forward, and I think
You'll be happy to know I have a draft.
Oh, excellent. I think you're exactly right to link these two.
Yeah. Very good. Further discussion on the motion. Councilmember Puritan?
So I guess going back, a letter's great. But there are three of us that I think are committed to actually show up at the meeting. So all I want to know, because my thing is going forward with the plan. The plan has been with Substance Abuse Connect. If you need to do something, if you need to reevaluate, all action plans are reevaluated. And so if there's that evaluation that needs to happen, then it needs to be open and transparent. So Jennifer, you would be addressing something completely different, but, goes in line with what, the mill levy was for. I'm not sure what the mayor was going to mention or what Danny was going to mention, but I think what it does is that it gives us a collected voice on what we hope to see that will happen through Substance Abuse Connect. One of the other things is I would really like to see one of city council members in an elected position in your executive committee, because I think we carry a little bit more weight, if you will, with the population who put us here than what the city administrator does. I'm not taking that away from Chris, but I'm just saying that I truly like to see city council members representing the city. So I don't know, no one may agree with me, but that's just my thoughts. So anyway, I still plan on being there. Whatever that motion was, if it's just saying, yeah, you guys can go and say what you think you need to say, then I would be supportive of it. I don't think that, I don't guess I need anyone to put words in my mouth to say what I want to say, because everyone else has their own words, and I think they're all valid. So I guess that's all I'm asking, is just for support. I didn't really want an initiative, but I just wanted, do we have your support to go before the city commissioners? Or county commissioners?
Councilmember Shaw, her motion would say yes.
Yes, that's exactly what the motion is.
And technically, sounds like they're going to get their money through the end of the year. But what I'm hearing also is general,
No, they won't. It'd be 30 days short of
oh, I'm sorry, I messed up on the math. You'd still, even if it didn't become effective until, what was the day? May
29th.
May 29th, that would still leave you 15 days short of the 30 days short?
June 30th.
June 30, okay, May 30, June, so, okay, so you're getting shorted, so to speak. Okay, Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have a question, a clarification from Councilmember Owen about linking the conversation about linking the two things. I'm not sure what two things are being linked.
If we're going to support these efforts for diversion, substance abuse, mental health treatment, I believe we also need to undertake a jail expansion study. So I think that effective diversion depends on incarceration. Based on what the chief said tonight, they are seeing unprecedented levels of contempt in the community for the system. And so I think we have to talk about these two things together, hand in hand.
But I did not hear that to be a condition of the motion itself, but, okay. Councilmember Joy?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, as a local affairs subcommittee, we would have really enjoyed having more support from our partners across the street in addressing this. We haven't quite got there yet. I would just say that this motion isn't to link those two things. If you're going to link those two things, there are a whole bunch of actors, stakeholders that need to be at the table. The sheriff. The sheriff is elected. He is the administrator of the detention center. There are more stakeholders that need to be a part of this if you're going to talk about the administration of the jail. And I think Mr. Tarakides might have a dog in the fight, but he might not have a dog in this motion. He has a dog in this motion, but maybe not as big a dog in that linkage that's being made. So this motion doesn't have that linkage. I just think that in order to create the partnership that's necessary to make it effective, that we have to have the stakeholders there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Council, let's try to move to a vote. Councilmember Boyette, last word.
last word. There's always two sides to every story, and we haven't heard the other side. So, I mean, I don't want to be saying, oh my goodness, the council is wringing their hands, you can't do this. I don't know the rest of the story from their side. I don't know how far we should go unless we hear what the commissioners have to say. Then we could come back and say something, but I can't say yes or no at this point because I have no information.
Okay, thank you. Councilor, ready to vote? Is the motion clear? Clear enough? In favor of the motion made by Councilmember Shaw, second by Councilmember Joy, to authorize an expression of support generally for the Substance Abuse Connect to receive funding through the end of their one-year term to the end of June. If in favor of that motion, say yay. No, say, what do I say? Aye.
We've been saying aye
For 6 years? Yeah, I forgot. Okay.
Yeah, 6 years.
It's late. We missed our break. I rely on that break. Say aye. If opposed, say nay. Okay, Councilmember Boyd voted in the opposition, but I believe everybody else voted in favor. So the motion passes 9 in favor, 1 against. That concludes our council initiative. No, it doesn't. Councilmember Triki.
I just want to make the following statement. The ordinance that we passed today makes it more available for people to have guns. It allows people to have guns in schoolyards. It allows people to have guns in playgrounds. And those were things that were not allowed before. And the one thing that I really want to hammer about this, the 6 people who died in Nashville today, those were not criminals. Those were children. Those were people who were just working. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other council. Do we have another council initiative? Councilmember Owen.
Mayor, I mentioned this earlier, and I just want to restate real quickly. I think it is time for us to start working more diligently on public safety strategies. I think that's going to be a large part of our conversation this week. So I just want to float out that I've been working today on an initiative to establish some working groups, one on violent crime and one on family violence. I'm not including traffic safety because I believe Councilmember Triki has an initiative to that effect, but would certainly not oppose that in any way. And then would toss out to my colleagues a question as to whether or not it would be beneficial to have a working group on juvenile crime, on drug-related crimes, or any other topics. So I would just ask you as we head into this weekend to think about it. Please reach out if you're interested in working with me on this. But I think it's time that we start getting some of the other stakeholders and leaders at the table to talk about how we tackle this comprehensively. It is not fair to expect our law enforcement officers to do it all, and I think it's time for us to step up and consider some policy changes. Thank you, Mayor. Just flagging the coming initiative.
Sure. Okay. Very good. Councilor Triki?
I just want to say that the things that are going on right now with the Domestic Violence Task Force, with the mental health people, and with the traffic thing, all 3 of those are basically just trying to create something like Substance Use Connect on those topics. So it's basically just trying to bring the community together so that we can, do something. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Council, we are adjourned.